Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. A long time ago now, I put together a video ranking some of the best transformations featured in Bleach, and it was a tough one to get right, as Bleach is absolutely crammed full of incredible, meaningful designs that really highlight Kubo's almost totally infallible ability to create something awesome. The rule of cool is everywhere in Bleach, and the series is all the stronger for it, in my opinion, featuring some of the most beloved, most iconic transformations of the entire genre, maybe even the entire medium. But 2 years later, well, it's only fair that we now flip the script. And if I thought that last video was tough to make, it turns out I had another thing coming. I pored diligently over the cast of characters here to try and find some transformations that I flat out didn't like, and I could barely string together a full set of 10. We got there in the end, but it wasn't easy, which goes to show the level of immaculate control and understanding Kubo has over his characters. So in today's video, I'll be discussing the 10 worst transformations in Bleach, and the criteria here is far-reaching. These transformations could be here because I think they betrayed or let down the character, that they didn't represent or reflect the character well, or just that I straight up don't like them and think they look bad. This should be fun, and maybe even a little spicy, especially since I don't often talk about things in Bleach that I'm otherwise not that into. Of course, most importantly, this list is just purely my subjective opinion. I'm sure that someone's favourite form will end up on this list at some point, so if it does, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. Tell me why I'm wrong, and let me know which forms in Bleach you think are the worst down in the comments. Before we get started, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, consider hitting subscribe down below. If you're new here or you haven't done already, it's quick and easy to do, and your support does mean the absolute world. And consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, as well. Consider giving a subscribe over there if you like what you see, if you enjoy the content. Again, it will help massively in helping that channel to continue to grow, so your support is again greatly appreciated. Right, without further ado, let's begin with a couple of honourable mentions. Up first, taking the honourable mention slot this time, is Yhwach's new form after he absorbs his father and attains the Soul King's power, becoming essentially the most powerful being in the Bleach universe. In this form, Yhwach looks almost exactly the same as he did before, except he's now drenched almost head to toe in a black goop that constantly spills downwards from his face, the darkness covering his eyes like a veil. Meanwhile, gigantic eyes litter the black sludge oozing from him, moving and swivelling along the stream of power at all times. The reason this form makes the honourable mention slot is because sometimes it actually really works for me. There are moments where it's clear what Kubo is going for, and he succeeds in making it look incredible. Shots like these, for example, where Yhwach prepares to battle Ichigo, look amazing, and the overflowing power of Ryo, the power that Yhwach simply cannot contain, continues to spill out of him, coating the page in darkness. Kubo does a wonderful job using ink to create such a unique effect that really shines on the page and tells a story at the same time. But then there are, equally, instances where this form simply doesn't work for me either. At points, this form just isn't intimidating, which is odd considering Yhwach's current position and stature as essentially the almighty being of the universe, and he ends up looking less like an eldritch god, and more like he's just been slapped with googly eyes all across an otherwise indistinct black shape. Not only that, but this form actually, in my opinion, looks even worse later on, when he inexplicably removes that darkness veil from his face during his battle with Ichigo, resulting in a form that just looks plain messy, uneven, and he kind of looks like he's wearing an all-black hairnet. Despite its simplicity, I think it's actually quite an ambitious form to draw, and a difficult one to get right. Like I said, there are plenty of times where I really do like it, especially when the eyes aren't quite so visible, and when the darkness covers Yhwach to the point where he strongly resembles Old Man Zangetsu right down to the outfit. That's a great and clever connection for Kubo to make between their respective designs. And so, because it works for me sometimes, Yhwach's Soul King form is only an honourable mention today. My second and final honourable mention is another one from the end of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and that's Ichigo's true Tensei Zangetsu. At least as far as the Bankai's aesthetic is concerned, I think this is unequivocally a total downgrade over the previous iterations, specifically the Fullbring version of Ichigo's Bankai, which looked both intricate and incredible, subtle but powerful all the same. I know that neither of Ichigo's two prior Bankai were true, but to completely strip away their defining features, a thin black katana and a black robe, and replace them with, well, nothing, is a very weird choice, especially considering how beloved and iconic those looks were. Ichigo's original Bankai effectively defined that character's aesthetic for the better part of the entire Ankar arc. As a result, the true Tensei Zangetsu will simply never feel the same, because there's nothing to it by comparison. The blade itself is ugly and inelegant, and the lore behind it, behind its true form, its true shape, is convoluted and messy. And it's still so surprising, and honestly a shame that Ichigo doesn't wear anything new in this Bankai either. As Chad says in the Lost Agent arc, for Ichigo, to wear his power is his true form, and yet that notion is totally absent here at the endgame. The reason this is an honourable mention is because it doesn't feel fair to list it among the 10 when we've seen so little from it. As far as we know, Ichigo could only just be getting started with the true Tensei Zangetsu, so it feels a bit premature to judge it completely so quickly on such limited screen time. Well, you knew this was going to be on here, so we may as well rip the band-aid off right now as we get this list started for real. Sternritter L. The Love, Pepe Wakabrada's Gudoero, transforms the Quincy into essentially a twisted form of Cupid, and it's without a doubt one of the most reviled transformations in Bleach history. But the reason I've listed Gudoero here today isn't specifically because of the form itself, the way it looks. In fact, I've gone on record before saying Gudoero fits Pepe perfectly and completes his theme of tainted toxic love, to the end that he has a much more consistent character theme than a lot of the Sternritter. No, the reason I've listed Gudoero as one of the worst transformations in Bleach is due to how it immediately turned Pepe into a joke of a character. Even after he revealed his shrift to be the Love, which did disappoint me as well back in the day, Pepe still seemed like a sinister threat, and I liked how he turned against his own comrades in the pursuit of selfish glory. But Gudoero puts a stop to that immediately. Pepe becomes nothing more than a comic punching bag, as though Kubo himself knew that this was all kinds of stupid. I think Pepe could have transformed into a bastardized version of Cupid and still been threatening and evil, but Kubo does away with that instantly, instead using this opportunity to turn Pepe into a clown, and that's a real shame. The biggest crime of Kensei's Bankai Tekken Tachikaze is simply that it's boring. It's boring, in a world full of incredible Bankai, where really almost all of them, save for the aforementioned true Tensei Zangetsu I guess, have something going for them in the design department. At least in my opinion, Tekken Tachikaze is fundamentally disappointing and bland. After scouring every Bankai in the series, this is really the only one that stands out to me as feeling underwhelming in almost every way. Compared with the aforementioned true Tensei Zangetsu, that one does get off the hook by virtue of the fact that we don't know really how much of it we've seen. When it comes to Tekken Tachikaze, I'm pretty certain this is your lot. There's just very little going on here. The Bankai's ability is kind of interesting, I guess, but even then it feels very limited, certainly in comparison to virtually every other Bankai in the series, with no real scope or versatility whatsoever. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's just fancy punching. I don't really have much else to say, to be honest, though I did realise that Kensei's Bankai is completely broken during his fight with Masked Masculine. The iron band that encircles his head is basically ripped in two. So shouldn't that mean that he can't ever use it properly again? In the anime, though, he pulls out Tekken Tachikaze against Pepe, so I'm not entirely sure. Another form that I imagine everyone expected to see gracing this list is of course Zommari Leroux's Resurrección Brujería. Espada number 7 has an extremely slick and badass design in his base form, and his ability to create clones thanks to his immense speed and skill with Sonido was an awesome gimmick. And then once he releases his Zanpakuto, all of that just goes out the window. It's almost like looking at two totally different characters. Not only does Brujería completely de-emphasize Zommari's speed as his main trait, but it totally removes his legs altogether. Where almost every other Espada has a great Resurrección that otherwise complements their main power set or evolves on their base form in some tangible way that makes sense, Zommari's not only looks ridiculous, turning the Espada into a giant pink pumpkin covered in eyes, but also inexplicably gives him a totally new ability at the focus of his character that is otherwise essentially totally disconnected from everything we saw him doing in his base form. The thing is, I don't dislike everything about Brujería at all. The idea of sovereignty and control as the central core of an ability set is really neat. The idea of Zommari using his many eyes to control his enemies is cool, and I think the top half of the design actually works quite well too, especially his skeletal hollow cowl. Zommari definitely appears like something occult and creepy in this form, which is pretty effective, but doesn't really gel with how he was introduced at all, making me wonder if Kubo decided to change his approach to this Espada midway through his one and only fight. It's weird, when you think about it, most Espada either don't have a defining ability when in base, meaning their Resurrección is free to take on the form of whatever Kubo wants while keeping it in theme, like, say, Grimmjow or Stark for instance, or they do, and their Resurrección imitates and amplifies it, like Baragon or Aranero. Zommari is totally unique then, in that he does have an individual ability already in base, and his Resurrección does away with it entirely. We've spoken at length before about Harribel's Resurrección Tiburon, and how I think it's not only easily the weakest design of the top 3 Espada, and to be fair to her, she has very fierce competition there, with both Stark and Baragon having 2 of the best Resurrección of the bunch, but frankly one of the weakest of the Espada in general in terms of her Resurrección design. Again, when Harribel releases her Zanpakuto, she loses all of her clothes, because of course she does. Ironically, Kubo already showed us how to create an awesome Resurrección for a female Espada with Nell's Gamuza, so Harribel feels like a big step down as a result. And there isn't much to identify Harribel here as being at least thematically related to sharks whatsoever, save for her enormous shark tooth broadsword, which is by far, coincidentally, my favourite part of this form. But no, while the design itself is disappointing, the real reason Tiburon graces this list is simply because Harribel becomes a shell of her otherwise terrifying former self the moment she activates it in a way that doesn't really make sense. Again, we've discussed this before on the channel, but Harribel goes from overpowering Hitsugaya's Bankai with real force and tenacity in her base form, to playing right into the captain's hands by releasing her Zanpakuto for really no reason at all, and switching to a water-based moveset, something that, as it turns out, is practically impossible to even hit Hitsugaya with, greatly diminishing her effectiveness on the battlefield, yes, but also her overall impact in general. As we move on to the next transformation, Consider checking out Mr. Tomo Talks Games if you haven't done already. Elden Ring Night Rain is coming out at the end of the month, and that is what the channel is focusing on right now. So if you're interested in that game at all, any of From Software's titles, or other Souls-like games, have a look over on the channel, consider checking it out, maybe leave a subscribe if you enjoy what you see. I really would appreciate the support. Okay, and with the plug done, up next we have Bazz-B's pitiful excuse for a Vollständig. Likely the single worst holy form I think revealed in the series. And considering Bazz-B is one of the most important sternritter of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, his total lack of a meaningful transformation has always been exceedingly weird. To make matters worse, the heat is one of the best, most well-realised abilities among the Sternritter's otherwise crazy cavalcade of abstract powers, and so for Kubo to not want to expand on it with a Vollständig that actually does justice to the power is so odd to me. Bazz-B's Vollständig is about as basic as they come. He gains a pair of crimson wings that take the shape of literally bars, straight lines, and a simplistic halo, and that's that. I get it, I think. The wings being bars are supposed to reference burn a finger, but I mean, come on. This completely undermines an otherwise excellent character with a fantastic set of abilities. There were a few other Sternritter with similarly lackluster Vollständig, such as the Bambis and Robert for example, but they were significantly improved in the anime. And even then, let's be honest, their manga counterparts weren't as shallow as this. It's totally possible that my long-standing theory that the different Vollständig shapes are at least partially influenced by the individual Sternritter's innate loyalty to Yhwach, and that's why Bazz-B's is so minimal, but it doesn't fix the problem at hand. This is maybe the lamest transformation in the entire series, and it's a sorry sight. If you just watched my latest video discussing the non-Espada Resurrección, then you may have expected to see this form crop up here. Tesla's Veruga has never sat well with me, because it doesn't seem to make any sense for this character. Now, don't get me wrong, the actual design itself is totally fine, it's inoffensive enough, but again, where the Resurrección tend to at least slightly line up with the Arrancar's base form, especially where the non-Espada Arrancar are concerned, Tesla becoming this gigantic lumbering meathead of a warthog is just weird, considering what, admittedly little, we saw and knew of him prior. Tesla has as well this really awesome sealed Zanpakuto, with a ring in the blade capable of generating a protective shield in the centre, and the guard is ornate and curved, flowing downwards with what I always thought were scales on the back. And so as a result, I remember expecting Tesla to be some kind of majestic lizard or reptilian hollow with defensive scales as his main ability, especially thanks to his often stoic and cold disposition, but then he just transforms into a hulking beast. This is definitely a little similar to another transformation that's going to come later in this list, in that Kubo just seemed to throw away a perfectly interesting character design for something big and bulky that could be easily and dramatically defeated by Kenpachi nonetheless. Okay, I get it. Wonderweiss's Extingear is meant to look weird. Again, as with Tesla's Veruga, I just discussed this Resurrección in my previous video, so I won't spend too long on it here, but regardless, whether it's supposed to look unnatural and odd or not, I'm just not sure it works either way. Wonderweiss honestly just looks far too silly to be taken seriously as a threat, which is compounded by the fact that Yamamoto annihilates the modified Arrancar with ease. I don't know, this is a tricky one for me, as I think again some aspects of the form work. Like his missing eyes, for example, which is genuinely eerie, but other than that, this kind of feels like a mess. What's with all the arms? I mean, it makes for a cool visual on that one page, but apart from that, this feels like a mishmash of ideas and concepts that never quite coalesce. I mean, is the arms just supposed to be to do with the fact that Wonderweiss's entire character is about sealing Ryujinjaka, and the arms are about holding things in place? I've got absolutely no idea. It doesn't help either that it feels like there could have been a lot more to Wonderweiss than what we got in the end, and this form is a byproduct of that. Much of what was interesting about Wonderweiss's design previously, his crown hollow mask fragment, his giant claymore Zanpakuto, it's all gone here without explanation. Instead, Wonderweiss, who Kubo had been successfully building anticipation for throughout the arc, was a plot device to help Aizen defeat Yamamoto and was then destroyed in the span of a single chapter. And in my battle analysis of this particular fight, I talked about how I quite like the role that Wonderweiss ended up with here, but the form itself is almost too weird to work. Giriko's Time Tells No Lies was easily one of the most interesting Fullbring introduced during the Lost Agent arc, giving its wielder the power to set and negotiate contracts with the mysterious God of Time, empowering Giriko to have complete and total control over certain specific situations and parameters. Anyone who violates these contracts, including Giriko himself, will be subjected to the ruthless flames of time, which incinerate anything and anyone they devour. It's a really cool power, and one with a huge ceiling of potential. Sadly, when it came time for Giriko to battle Kenpachi at the end of the arc, Kubo tossed the entire ability into the trash, and Giriko along with it. Giriko's weird Hulk form he takes on in his final moments is emblematic of Kubo's attitude towards this character and his power. For all the intrigue, for all the possibilities of this time-based ability, Giriko just inexplicably turns into a gigantic, muscle-bound imbecile, served up on a silver platter for Kenpachi to unceremoniously carve into. It serves no other purpose than that, and so there's no real reason to put that much effort in. There's no link here to Time Tells No Lies whatsoever, really, outside of a superfluous, surface-level explanation. It doesn't help that the form looks ridiculous too, made even more so in the anime by having Giriko turn green for some reason. If I had to guess, unironically, I would say it is actually supposed to be a Hulk reference, but also to help circumvent some censorship by making Giriko less human as much as physically possible. But yeah, I mean, this just sucks all round. The form completely betrays Giriko's original ability of Time Tells No Lies, leaving us with something wholly unsatisfying in its wake. Yoruichi's Shunryo Kokubyo Senbei form could have been awesome, the final stage of her mastery over Shunko. Instead, Yoruichi is reduced to an almost unrecognisable state, quite literally becoming cat-like, and now sporting a lightning bikini naturally, while taking on Askin. After Kisuke forces her to transform, Yoruichi loses her sense of self and her mind as she devolves, becoming little more than a feline in order to continuously alter her Reiatsu to counter Askin's the death dealing. It doesn't help that this may very well be one of the most convenient transformations in the entire series, changing the makeup of her innate power in such a way as to be the perfect counter. But also, I've never really understood how this form even makes sense within the lore. What does Yoruichi's ability to turn into a cat, inherited through her Shihoin bloodline, and by the way, she can still talk normally in this cat form, have to do with Shunko, which is simply the mixing of Kido and Hakuda, something other Shinigami not of Shihoin blood can achieve? How are the two connected in such a way? This form goes completely unexplained, and is then swiftly defeated anyway once Askin activates his Vollständig. Yoruichi's prior Raijin Senkei form, her initial Shunko transformation, is, in my opinion, a lot cooler and way more effective in both appearance and characterization. The very worst part about this transformation, though, is the fact that she completely loses her recognizable personality as a result, considering Yoruichi is a fan-favorite character and one of the coolest in the series. That is what so many people fell in love with initially. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If Yoruichi simply retained her mind in this form, I think I would like this form a lot more, explained or not. And this stings all the more when you consider that this is her very last appearance in the manga, in the story, something I'm hoping the anime will rectify when the time comes. And so we come to the final form on this list. Of course, while in no particular order, this list is still my personal opinion, and so this one hurts a lot. Many of you probably know by now that Sosuke Aizen is my favourite character in Bleach, and I know it's a pretty basic pick, but it is what it is. Aizen is just such an effortlessly cool character, and sublime in the role of the series' main villain. But once his soul begins to break down and reform thanks to the Hōgyōku's influence, Aizen undergoes a series of transformations, of evolutions, as he transcends to a higher plane. Now I'm cheating a little bit here, but I want to discuss all of Aizen's Hōgyōku forms as I feel differently about each one, with varying degrees of severity, and my thoughts on each are conflicted and complicated. So let's begin with his initial cocoon transformation. Now, I think I've actually softened on this form over the years for the most part, but the cocoon was always polarizing, even for me. There's a reason people used to call this form Condom Aizen, and I mean, I get it. And personally, I always liked to think he resembled a ghost or something at points, but yeah, there is no denying he looks really weird here. And again, like Wonderweiss beforehand, that is kind of the point. Aizen himself says to Kisuke that midway through evolution is always ugly, and it results in a form that at times works, but has a lingering aura of disappointment about it as well. I like that Kubo commits to this idea of Aizen's soul breaking down inside the cocoon, that there's actually nothing in there at all at this point, and you see that when Isshin strikes him, of course, but Kubo also cleverly teases it when Aizen pulls Kisuke's ring seal from his wrist intact, something that wouldn't be possible if his material body still existed within the cocoon. But he also gets weirdly acrobatic in this form, pulling off poses and stunts that just look odd, and not at all in keeping with the character we knew. Again though, I have kind of softened on this form, and I actually think it does look pretty cool when it's all cracked and broken and his sword has fused to his hand fully. Then we get Aizen's initial transcendent form, after he emerges from his cocoon, now with long flowing hair and dark inhuman eyes. This was always the fan favourite of Aizen's Hōgyōku transformations, and that goes for me too. This is the best of the bunch, though I've actually soured a little on this form as time has gone by. Basically because I don't think the outfit works at all here, and Aizen himself ends up looking weirdly, unnaturally skinny at points. Rather than him walking around in essentially just the tattered remnants of his cocoon, I wish the cocoon had maybe transformed into something more angelic, something more regal, and more fitting for the character and the place he found himself in at this point in the narrative. And that brings us nicely to Butterflaizen. Oh, Butterflaizen, pretty much the sole reason these Hōgyōku forms are on this list. Yes, I've always had a chip on my shoulder about this form, I just don't think it looks good at all, really, and it completely robs Aizen of any threat or intimidation he possibly had beforehand. And I get what Kubo was going for here. Despite the name, Aizen's new form actually seems to be more reminiscent of something akin to a moth-like creature, though of course both they and butterflies share this same journey of chrysalis and evolution, that which Aizen himself has undergone. And moths symbolize death, destruction, but also the more traditional transformation and metamorphosis, the pursuit of knowledge, all of which fits Aizen absolutely perfectly. But Kubo's usual mastery over the rule of cool is totally absent here. At least as far as I'm concerned, Aizen doesn't look majestic or godly, he just looks ridiculous and unimposing. As with many of these forms, that's not to say it doesn't work at all. I like his blank, empty eyes, I like the third eye now on his forehead, that makes him look and feel suitably divine, and I like the purple veins connecting to the Hōgyōku that now sits perched in a large hollow hole. All of this does capture the essence of a divine, aloof god of sorts. But rather than an angel, or even a moth, Aizen comes away from this form looking like a dainty little fairy or something, and it just doesn't work for me. Then we have Aizen's final, eldritch Hōgyōku transformation, and to be honest, I don't have any issues with this form. Actually, I think it's a pretty awesome exploration of how the Hōgyōku is corrupting Aizen and completely overtaking him, pushing him beyond limits even he thought he would have to go. Aizen's head being ripped open to reveal a blackened, glossy skull-like visage, while the tattered remains of his face hang on either side, is maybe one of Kubo's craziest, most metal designs ever, and it looks really great. So where Aizen is concerned, I don't think the Hōgyōku transformations betray the character or anything like that. In fact, I think they're very in keeping with Aizen's journey with his goal to transcend beyond Shinigami and Hollow, and I think from that perspective they work really well, and I like the progression of the evolution. It's just an aesthetic thing for me. I just don't think Kubo stuck the landing where some of these forms are concerned. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Remember, this is just my subjective opinion. This is just my personal list, though I'm sure I've made somebody upset and angry out there. But like I said, do please make sure to let me know down in the comments how you feel about this list. Do you agree with any of my inclusions? Are there any on here that you'd swap out for something different? Let me know your thoughts and your least favourite, the worst transformations in Bleach down in the comments below. I'm not expecting that big a spread, to be honest. I think some of them on my list will be universally agreed upon, because there really aren't that many forms that are bad at all in Bleach, so I'd be interested to see what you guys have for me, if anything at all that differs from my own. Do please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to see them. Okay, everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. And a massive, everlasting thank you goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to keep doing this. Your support does mean the absolute world to me, and it makes the world of difference. Okay, everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.